Hello, Mystery Monday friends. We are looking at trapezoids in this lesson, number 6, and I'm going to start off with a version of trapezoids where we're bringing together a wide variety of scraps. My first one is called Scrappy Trapezoids, and it entirely cuts all the scraps up into half square triangles. And working with those half square triangles, I created one single block. When I put it together, you notice it's just one block. There's 12 blocks in this, 3 across, 4 down. And it's great impact. It gives a great secondary design that's in there. And so I thought, I wonder what it would look like if I put a white background up against it. And so you'll see this version where I put this together and then looked at it from what it would look like as a finished quilt. And what I started looking at was what fabrics I have in my stash that I am tired of and I really need to get out the door. And so I came across a grouping that I had, and they were Kay England's. They were like a version of 30s, a beautiful collection. I loved it, but I'm tired of it. And so this is what I have left over, and I really committed to wanting to use it all up. I don't know exactly how much fabric is in here, so I don't know what size it's going to be. So I'm going to employ my weighing example, and I've got pieces that I can cut a lot of 3.5-inch squares, and I pulled out things that weren't. So I started off with weighing 1 yard of a fabric. So I've got 1 1/3 yards, and it was 208 grams. And then I went ahead and I weighed some fat quarters, and those are 1, and they weighed 178 grams. So now I'm going to roll everything together, and if I look at my weight on this, it's 668 grams. And so if I do the cross multiplying on that, for my example, if I compared it to the first one, it comes out to like 4.27 yards, and my second example comes out to 3 3 3/4 yards. So close to 4 yards. That's enough to make a decent size of double quilt. And so I'm going to pair it up with a navy fabric that I have, and this is a navy fabric that is Amanda Murphy fabric, and I like how it works together with this. So I just need to know, like, total out of this is going to be about 8 yards. And that's about what I need for a double or queen size. Now, occasionally I'll use a yellow. So I started auditioning some other pieces in there for these fabrics, and I think this is just fine to work with. Now, my first pieces I'm going to cut are 3-inch finished half square triangles. And if you notice in this one, I've got that 3-inch finished half square triangle both in my 12-inch cube and in my 6-inch cube. So I'm going to start stacking them up. I need to cut all of this fabric up into these half square triangles because I'm going to use it all up. So I have those 2 dies that are repeated, and I love having the 2 of them because as I stack them up, I'm going to be able to send them both through the cutter next to each other or back to back. And so I'll get a lot done because I'm going to cut all of this up and be done with it. And it's going to be a good way to use all of those pieces up. And so I'm trimming down everything I can into sizes that I can put onto that 3-inch finished half square triangle die. So as I start looking at this and saying, gee, I wonder how many I have. So I started counting how many stacks of 6 I have. And in every stack of 6, I would have 12 half square triangles. And for the blocks, for each block, I'm going to need 32 half square triangles. And so if I was going to go with what I've already stacked up there, I'd have enough for 6 blocks. So now that's not big enough for a lap quilt. So I'm going to keep cutting into this to see how big it's going to be. And this math is not necessary, but if you wonder how much it's going to be, then that's how we're going to work on it. Now in this video, I'm showing you, I'm going ahead and cutting every little piece of fabric up. And you can see I'm just going through, it's way speeded up, and I'm able to use up all of that fabric. Pretty exciting stuff. Assessment that I had when I pre-counted how many stacks I had. I have cut here about 600 triangles. Now another way to figure out how many you cut without counting them all is this. I would go ahead and set down the stack, and I would set my tailor's guide ruler. Over here, by the way, is all my scraps that are left over, and that's really all that's left over. And that's, I cut up, I have a few pieces that are too small to make that triangle, but here's how I would do this. Is I would set this at about 1 inch, and then I would measure from the bottom up to what 1 inch is. Okay, there we go. So then I would count how many are in this 1 inch. Then I would go back and I would measure how tall this stack is and how tall this stack is and divide it by this one. So if there was, for example, if this was 10 inches of fabric and this 1 inch had 50 pieces in it, so then that means I would have 500 approximately triangles. You need to stop counting these things. You have fabric, and this is the best way for me to use this up. Now, when I look at the block and I looked at that and I thought, well, I'll have enough to make maybe 16 blocks, so 4 across by 4 down, but I think I have more than that, so I'm going to employ one of the techniques using the rest of them either into pinwheels, or I'm going to repeat the trapezoid into a border, maybe a border on the chest, top and bottom. That's the beauty of working like this, but the real beauty is that this stack of fabric that I wasn't real happy with is now, that's all that I have left over. That's negligible, and I'm ready to move on. So let's get to looking at the trapezoid. 3.5 inches that I can cut. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off a piece of it to get 3.5 inches. And that's if you're wanting to make it the size that I'm doing it, where it's going to make it into an 18-inch block. If you were going to make this with a 2.5-inch strip, then your block will be 12 inches. So those measurements are in your chart too. Alright, so what I've done is I've cut off that one side, and then I'm going to go in here and cut it with my half square triangle ruler. Okay, so my first cut, I'm going to line it up here with my 3.5 inches, and I'm going to cut the one edge off, and then I'm going to turn it over, flip it over, and then I'm going to cut my other 3.5 inch half square triangles. So that's how I cut half square triangles with a specialty ruler. Now, if I was going to be doing this with those half square triangles, I would do the same sewing to make the trapezoid. So trapezoid is 3 half square triangles sewn together. We have a bias edge here and we have a bias edge there. So again, finger pressing is really important. And so what I've done is one of the things that I love about the 12-inch cube is I can actually get 2 of the trapezoids on the board. So I was able to put through a square of fabric that I was able to get 2 of these in there. So when I do that measurement, the size of this square is it's perfectly at 7 inches. So if I cut it at about 7.5 inches, here's what I was able to accomplish. I then was able to take the scraps, come back through, and use the scraps and cut these pieces out of it. So I had very little waste. Now, if I want to measure this piece, I probably would have more likely cut those at 8 inches. But and I was able to get half square triangles out of those pieces and was able to put those in. So this is the other piece to it. This is my half square triangle, which is my 3-inch finished. And then my last piece we're going to be showing you is the chisel, because there is an opportunity to use it in this particular block, in the scrappy trapezoid block. So let's look at how those elements work out. So, and when we look at a quarter of this, this is what that piece looks, that matches up with the other half of the half square triangle. So, excuse me, with the other half of the trapezoid. So this is the center of that unit. However, when you sew it together, what I'm going to get is I sewed together 4 triangles on that side, and then I attached a half square triangle to the other side. And so when I sew them together, I'll sew them with this right side up so I can keep an eye on that point, and that's my pieces that factor in there. Now let's look at the other parts of this, because the other parts up in the corner on this one is we have a half square triangle that we're going to put up in the corner, and it's paired up with a navy half square triangle. So it's going to be up here in this corner. And then what you can do with this piece is then I went ahead and I was able to do the chisels. So the chisel went here and here, and then I'm going to finish it off with half square triangles in these other sections. There we go. So that is 1/4 of a block. Now, as you look at this, don't be fooled, because this kind of looks like a parallelogram. It is not a parallelogram. It is a chisel. Now, in patterns that you see, if you see any of this online, this is a square, this is a square, these are half square triangles, and this whole thing is half square triangles. This gives you the chance to work with this with your AccuQuilt. So that's the primary units. I'm going to get stitching up some of these. This is a really fun little block to sew. And again, keeping in mind this is 3, 6, 9. That makes this block 18 inches across finished. If I did it with an 8-inch cube, it would be 2, 4, 6. It'd be a 12-inch finished block. Just as sweet. So when I started playing with my triangles, I realized I had a lot of triangles, and I separated them out so that I got a good mixture, so that when I'm choosing from my triangles along the left side, then I can mix them up quite a bit. I have quite a bit of about 4 different fabrics, so I wanted to make sure I distributed those well. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm doing the corners. And if you notice in that corner of the block, we have 2 half square triangles put together. So as I'm going over there and I'm looking at the fabrics that I have, these are all the colors that I had. And so I'm going to be putting together 4 of them for those 4 triangle units. And so I start off with 4 sets of 2 half square triangles sewn together like normal, and I'm sending them into the machine. I've got my point-to-point turner, I have my Annie's Tailor's awl, and I have my thread snips and my seam ripper nearby, and my chain stitch cutter. Now, as I put these pieces together, I'm not really fussing with making sure they are not all matching, because I have about 30 different colors in this one. And it probably, I have a lot of a few, so I made sure I used a good distribution of those in the block. So of the 32 half square triangles I'm using in there, I probably put 4 of the red that I had quite a bit of to make sure I got a good distribution. And I pulled those aside, knowing I can always pull from my whole stash. So I'm sending through now those half square triangles that are going to comprise the middle piece to it. And I brought out my chain piece cutter. I love that little piece. It has a rotary blade in it. And when I press these, I want to press them away from the block that I choose, the triangle I choose, to be the center of the 4 of them, because I want all the seams pushed away from that center triangle, because I want it to frame out well. So as I'm sitting here just choosing the 4 for this block, and then what I'm going to do is set the next one on. Now when I set that on there, I want to make sure that my outer edges are square when I'm sewing that triangle on there, and I'm running it into the machine. And so, because they're going to be turned out, and then they're going to have a bias edge on the bottom of that. So I want to be careful with that. And again, only using my point-to-point turner. So on that one, I press the seams away from that darker blue, because that's going to be my center block. And then I'm adding on the right wing of those triangles. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to separate them out and keep working. And there's my last one. And now I'm adding the other side to it. So I'm piecing together the 4 half square triangles first for the 4 blocks, for the 4 units in my first block. I'm going to continue to work this way, especially on this when I do it scrappy, because then I get to study each block. If I don't like a set of 4 triangles for this one because I've repeated the color too many times, I can always set it aside and use it in a future one. A lot easier than pulling it apart later on if I'm disappointed with how a block turns out. So then I'm going to be putting these colors in here. Again, when I chose those 32 fabrics, it wasn't that I fussed with them. I just wanted to make sure I had an even distribution of, I have a lot of the 2 reds in there. And I wanted to make sure they were distributed throughout each one of them. So I chose like 3 or 4 of those to put into each of the blocks, because 32 half square triangles is a lot for a block. But keep in mind, this block is a much bigger block. It's 18 inches across. So it's going to have a lot of impact. Now I'm adding on that half square triangle onto the one side of the trapezoid. I had one of them in there. And then I'm turning over my piece block and putting it on top of my trapezoid first. That is because my trapezoid block with the 1 triangle on it is probably more square than my one that has the 4 triangles on it. So I'm proofing my work as I go along. So I'm chain piecing on more of the triangles onto the trapezoid. Really, really, really resist the temptation to want to sew all of these for your whole quilt. It's not good for you. And if you get tired of this, you don't have a partially sewn block. So there's my last one, and I'm going ahead and putting it together with these pieces. Now I was a little bit tripped up on the way that I press the seams on these. And so on this first one, I chose to wait until I went to put the 4 blocks together. And what I found is that in alternating on one of them, I pressed the seams towards the blue, excuse me, on 2 of the blocks towards that navy blue, and 2 of them I pressed away from the navy blue. Because when you put the blocks together into the 4 patch that it is, you're going to see that it is going to, that you want them to lock together a little bit so that your seams are opposing each other. Now, I can't tell you exactly how to do this because there's a couple of ways of doing it. One, you could push them, 2 of them towards the navy blue and 2 away from the navy blue, or you can press one, the outers one way and the inners the other way. But what I found was once I sewed it together into the 4 patch, like you see me doing here, I kind of had an aha moment and said, next time, this is how I'm going to do it. So what I tried was I tried both ways. I tried pressing the inner seam one direction and the outer seam the other direction, and then I tried pushing both of them the same way. I would just recommend the aim is you can see how those seams oppose each other. So on that bottom with the triangles together, I have one seam going up and one seam going down. You'll understand this better when you're stitching this out, and don't get all wigged out and unsew your first one. So now as I looked at it and put the pieces together crosswise, then I went ahead and I did my point-to-point turner to kind of boss the seams before I would even think about pressing it. And that's when I really learned which way I'm going to do it. So the next one I decided I'm going to push like the upper left and the lower right towards the navy and vice versa in the other ones, away from the navy. And then that way those seams lock together so I have those points on those trapezoids that go around there. So there it is all pressed out. Look at it. Turned out really great. I'm very happy with it. I decided to do a second block because I thought, well, what I learned on the first one, I'd like to apply to the second one. So you can see I had my seams going different directions on the first one because that's when I experimented with it. So when I did my second one, I used a formula where I put things together, quote, correctly. So this is the first one that I had done, and this is just the center. I haven't added the sashings around the outside edge. And you can see this is the one where I learned about which way to send the seams. On this one, I sent the seams where I sent the insides going one way and the outsides going another way. On the next one, I chose to make the opposing ones go opposing seams. However, this was my first stitch out. And so you need to know that I can do this too. I'm really good at it. And it's a lot of fun to seam rip something like that real easily and put it together. This worked out much better, making it seams that the 2 outsides, I sent them towards the blue, and then the opposites, I sent them away from the blue. So the first part of this lesson, I started with something that looks more complex, but is actually pretty simple. And I'm taking you to this next part, which looks simpler, but it has some more complex piecing because I want to take you through how the trapezoid probably came to be. This is just my hypotheses. Now, when we started with the trapezoid, it usually starts off with half square triangles. So we usually didn't see it called a trapezoid. And so as you can see, I'm building out just 4 half square triangle units, and they're all going the same direction. And you're going to start to see what evolves here. And I chose all different colors. But if I go in and I colorize it a little bit differently, and I start putting the elements in there piece by piece, I start seeing an evolution of the theory of where the trapezoid came from and the block that we're going to be building. So I've got all my backgrounds in there. I have my point out towards the outer edge. And then I start painting in these 3 blocks, the exact same color, and voila, we see a trapezoid come out of this. And the trapezoid built up is that when we put them together, you get this really fascinating element if you put it together as a 4 patch. It's one of my favorite elements in piecing, and I don't use it a lot, but when I see it, it really strikes my interest. And you can see this that I'm showing you is all as if it was built with all half square triangles. So this can all be done with your specialty ruler, with traditional piecing. However, we're always aiming at trying to reduce the seams. Look at how fascinating this would be as a border. This would be a really cool border or a sashing around something. Now, this is the way the block looks if you were to put it together all as half square triangles. This is totally within your range with specialty rulers or AccuQuilt. However, as we go in and we start looking at how can we reduce some of the seams, we have some options in there. So I'm painting out what the trapezoid looks like. And you can see that unit in there and how that factors in. And so I made it just as one fabric when I brought it in there. And we can do that on all four sides. If you notice also, I did that center block as one square, as a square on point. Now building that as a square on point is going to give us a chance to experiment with Y seams. And I know many of you have gotten to the point where you're starting to appreciate those. And this is a terrific opportunity. So as you can see, we've reduced a whole bunch of seams from this block. We've actually reduced it by 16 seams. This is what it looks like if you wanted that center and you didn't want to do it as Y seams, you could still do it as half square triangles. So when we look at those elements, putting them together, again, this is what it looks like if we were going to build that out with all half square triangles. This is what it's looked like to build it out with just the trapezoid plus the half square triangles. So you can still do that as a possibility. And this is the block that we're going to go into next as we put this together. And I'm choosing to do it as a 12-inch. And here's what it looks like with the Y seams in it. First unit that I showed you, showing you Scrappy, that's a really fun one to do, and there's going to be some really great uses out of it. And I've decided for the second one that I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you a simpler version. And what I did was I went into my K-Facet scraps and I cut from K-Facets. Now everything I cut for a matching block. This is a block that I'm showing you here, and we're going to explore what this looks like with some different versions. And so this first version I'm showing you is actually entirely cut with AccuQuilt. The center of this is cut with square on point because we're going to do Y seams on this. And so we're going to start there, and I'm going to start with the hard one first. Now, I took and I pulled a denim linen-like fabric that I was going to put together with this, and this is how that will look when I put it together with these 4 units around the outside edge. Ooh, no, I had this other color. I cut more of them. Where is she? I cut these, and then as I was cutting I realized I had not counted this piece. There we go. There's my other pieces. And then it's always fun to find the fabric when you're on camera. So I'm going to make this a little bit simpler. I'm going to look for something that I know that I have 4 of right here on the top to show you. So here's 4. Alright. Does that happen to you? You lose one fabric and you just can't move forward. Alright. Here we go. So I'm going to put my trapezoids around the outside edge of this. And if you notice, this is where our Y seams are. Now, I'm not going to recommend that. In fact, this isn't possible for you to cut out traditionally because we cannot cut out the trapezoid. And so I am going to show you how you can make this block, though, if you're doing specialty rulers. So we're going to put these pieces in. Now, at this juncture, we're going to be putting our triangles around the outside edge. And so I chose different K-Facet fabrics to go around the outside edge. The key to working with K-Facet's fabrics is not to get quite so worked up. This is more like a Turkish rug than it's like something you'd wear to work or to an engagement. So, you know, you have to K-Facet fabrics are ones that the more you play with them, the more you free yourself up from a lot of rules. Alright, so now I've got these pieces around the outside edge, which means then I need to surround them by my denim pieces. So here we go. And when I cut these, you can see, like on this one, I cut my units from it, and then I stepped out of it and went ahead and did these pieces. So I cut the little half square triangles out of this. This is not going to use a whole lot of background fabric. It's going to use up a lot of squares, the squares and the triangles, and I'm out of half squares, it appears. Now when I sew this together, and so I'm just going to show you this much of it, I'm going to sew together this unit, I'm going to sew together this unit, and this is my Y-seam unit. So there's a couple ways you can do it. One is that you can build this whole unit here by putting these 4 triangles together and attaching it to the trapezoid, and then work these pieces in. Or you could go ahead and make this piece and just do your Y-seams here and then attach those to the outside edge. So I would say do one, then move on and do the next one, and so forth. And that's really how you're going to work on these pieces as you go around. Now, as I look at these units, these are, this is a 12-inch block. So, and how do I know that? Is because these are 3, 6, 9, and 12. Now, if you were going to make this out of an 8-inch cube, it's going to be an 8-inch unit. But this is going to be how I cut it. And then we'll go in now and we're going to look at how would we cut this unit here to make this into a trapezoid. So you can do this block with a specialty ruler. However, you're then going to have a seam through the center. So that's totally possible for you to do, and I don't want to exclude you from this opportunity. This is a way to get into it. The way that you can cut out the trapezoid using specialty rulers, and so I'm going to show you that. In order to cut it out the size that I'm having you cut it out, would be that we're using a 12-inch cube. I need a 6.5-inch strip of fabric. So I'm just cutting out of some scrap that I have here, and I'm going to cut I have here a 6.5-inch unit. So we're going to start off with a strip. I'm going to clean up this edge, and I'm going to make this at my 90-degree angle because I'm going to be cutting from the 6.5-inch strip a 6.5-inch cut half square triangle. And then I'm going to show you how you're going to make this using that trapezoid unit. And so I've got this edge, and I'm laying my half square triangle ruler on that strip. And let me get it over here. And so what I've got is I've got my 6.5-inch corner here and right down to here, and I'm going to cut this. We don't typically cut them this big, so this is kind of fun to see how this works. Okay. All right. And then I'm going to turn the ruler over, and then I've got my 6.5-inch right here. And so I'm going to cut a second one. Now, this is the base of a trapezoid, is half square triangles. Now, in order to get this to work, then I'm going to go to my background fabric, which is this one, and I'm going to cut 2 3.5-inch squares. So I'm using that nice little 7-inch square ruler. We still have these sets by K. England, and I love this this little set with this piece in there, and it has my 7-inch by 14-inch ruler as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut this into the 3.5 inches. And what I like about this piece is that corner fits right down in there. Get this a little bit more in that space. There we go. Now, when I want to use this to make this into a trapezoid, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay this half square triangle right in that space, and then I'm going to be sewing right here. So let me just show you what that looks like. And so basically my sewing line is going to come on that point to point right there. So that when I sew that line, then it's going to flip back, and voila, there I have my trapezoid. So that's how you can do it with a specialty ruler for this next unit that I've been showing you. Okay, the first step that we're going to do is we are going to be building out those triangles, and the triangles in the corners are going together where we have the 4 triangles matched up with our 4 background fabrics. And so on this machine I have my stitch lengthened a little bit. I have lightened up my presser foot pressure tension slightly because I do find that with this linen fabric that I have, it's a little bit heavier and it has plenty of tooth in it, and my K facet fabric is actually considerably, it's softer, it's more like a it's like a rayon. It's make very beautiful shirt fabric actually, in addition to quilting fabric. So different hands of fabric work through when you're piecing a little bit different, so you want to adjust your presser foot pressure tension as needed. And as I'm stitching these through, I'm seeing them going through really nice and smoothly. And I like how they're piecing. I don't have wiggle of the fabric on the top, due to the pressure from the fabric on the bottom. And my ends are matching up lovely. Now, as I go in here and work through these, I've got 4 for the 4 corners that I'm putting in. Let me get that 4th corner in there. Now, my fabric, this fabric in particular, this linen fabric that I have, I mainly chose it not because it's a linen, but because I wanted something denim looking. So with these K facet fabrics, think of a really beautiful shirt and wearing it with denim jeans. That's what I was going for. So I'm going to trim these apart. Now, as I go to look at these, and as far as which way to press them, that triangle, that pattern triangle, is going to be in the middle of all of my denims. So I could push all those heavier fabrics towards the center, but it's going to cause a lot of seams to come together on the tiny corners of those triangles. So I'm going to push it away from that fabric. So you can see what I've got going on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and line up my next triangles as I send each one through. And there I'm going to line that up, send it in there. I have a nice square unit. Now if you're using these with specialty rulers and you're cutting those pieces out, you are going to want to look at like how I walked in the machine with that last one. And the reason that that's important is I really want that corner to be as crisp as I possibly could get it. Because when you're putting these triangles together, you're basically putting them together and you're relying on, for example, like when I put my next triangle in, this is just like suddenly become a really big quarter square triangle because my bias edge is down here. So I want to make sure that this corner up here, this top, here and here, here and here, is as square as I can get it. If you notice, one thing that helps me keep that square is I raise my presser foot with my freehand system. So that's a lever down next to my leg that I actually push to raise it so I can keep both hands on my work. And so I keep working through this way. And again, I keep pressing these outer corners away from that center, because that center triangle, when you get done with the block, you kind of want it to stand all by itself, because it is, especially in this one where we're surrounding it with dark fabric, it's going to really have a profound impact on the design. So I'm going to line that up, walk it into the machine, and my next step is going to be is that I'm going to be sewing on the 4th triangle to all of the units. Hopefully you're appreciating working this way. I tend to find that I make fewer mistakes, or if I make a mistake, I haven't made it on 72 blocks that I have to then unpiece all of them. I usually just make the mistakes on the one block. And I'm not quite so frustrated. It actually, I mean, you're again, I've said this to you many times, you are creative. How do I know that about you, even if I haven't met you? You are drawn to pretty patterns, pretty designs. You like making things. You like creating, and otherwise you wouldn't take an interest. You'd be watching TV this afternoon. All right, and not that watching TV can't be creative. It can be, but you like making things. You are a maker, so I want you to honor that creativity in yourself. Now, on this one, when I position that on there, again, this top line here, right here, is important. I'm going to, this time, though, flip it over because I kind of want to keep an eye on those seams. So I'm going to raise up my foot, get it positioned into that 1/4 inch, and walk it in there. Coming out nice and sharp. I really love working with my point-to-point turner. Make sure you get a couple of them because you're going to want one by each machine and one in your travel bag when you go quilting somewhere else, because you do not want to forget this behind. I tend to find if I don't keep the 3, one by each of my machines and one in my bag, I have a tendency to have good intentions to pick it up and move it to the next one, and then I forget where I put it. So it's really nice to have the 3 of them. I do have, like for when I travel, I have a really basic bag of my tools that I use. And I have duplicates of everything. I even have a duplicate of my standard presser foot, my patchwork foot in there. And I like that because then I'm not taking things and then when I get home later on going, where did I put that piece? We are only 7 minutes into this and we are already finishing up these pieces. I say 7 minutes not to add stress to you, and nobody should look at their timing that way, but I do have people say to me that they feel like piecing this way takes more time. It really doesn't take any more time to do it this way than piecing in rows. What I do tend to find the real value of using your time this way, it takes the same amount of time to do this. The real value is you don't make as many mistakes. You also don't get as tedious, as tired. You get tired because many times you are bored, and you're bored with doing the same thing over and over again, and that's really where you lose time, because in the interim you go, let me go just check to see what's on social media, or let me see what the dog is doing, or gee, what's that sound out in the yard? Maybe I'll head out and check that one out. Creatives also have a tendency to naturally be distracted because we are coming up with creative solutions for lots of things. So, you know, it's not something to be fixed. It just is what it is in you. Okay. There's that 3. Now, do you see what I mean as far as how flat that center is laying? Look at that. So that triangle is well defined in there, and it's not getting undue pressure from the outside pieces. Now, I'm going to look at this piece a little bit differently. I can go ahead and I could piece all these on there, and so I am going to look at it that way. Now, when I do that, here's what I want to do is I'm looking at my first trapezoid. In order to get this to be positioned perfectly in the right place, what I'm going to recommend is that you press the center into that, and then take your point-to-point turner on your square, and let's press our center into that. And that is because we do not have any defining marks that tell us how far over left or right we are going to have to put that trapezoid onto the square. So I've got these pieces in here, so I've now marked the centers. And I marked the center of this trapezoid. So when I go to stitch that in place, I'm going to put it right there. See that? Alright, now I could sew it from this side, but I'm going to choose to sew it from this side because I can see where that corner is going to go. Now I'm going to engage my thread cutter here because I do want to start 1/4 away from that outer corner. So now on the back of this particular foot has a little notch here that's 1/4 of an inch behind that the needle. So where the needle is, that's 1/4 back. And so I'm going to lower my foot, and I'm going to, my foot has hover on it, so it picks up a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm 1/4 of an inch away from that corner. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my needle. Now I'm going to go forward 1 stitch, and then I'm going to go back 1 stitch, and then I'm going to go forward 1 stitch. And the only reason I'm doing this is, and it's not a garment tie off, but I don't want, when I go to work on that corner, I don't want later on for it to come out. Now, just like on the back of behind the needle, there was a hash mark. In front of the needle, there's also a hash mark that shows where that 1/4 inch is. There it is. And then I'm going to go back 1 stitch, and then I'm going to thread cut. Okay, now you can see that I stopped 1/4 of an inch from this corner and 1/4 of an inch from that corner. And so then what I'm going to do is that I'm now going to press this towards that lighter weight fabric because it's going to make it easier to fit in. And now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add on this next piece. Now, remember, I'm going to fold it in half just to find that center point, and then I'm going to position it in there. And then I've got my cross hash mark that I had marked in there. It's right there. And so that centers it. Okay, now once more I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to work from the back. Now the great thing about it this time, when I start over here, is that I can actually see that first piece that I'm going to go to. And so notice when I drop my foot on this one, it has what's called hover that I've engaged. So it's slightly above. So I'm going to drop my needle. Now what I did in order to drop that needle is that I set up my sewing machine so that when I hit the heel of the presser foot, the foot control, what it does is it drops my needle. So I'm going to go forward a stitch, and I'm going to push my reverse and just go backwards 1 stitch, and then I'm going to go forward. I'm going to go forward, and I'm getting right to that hash mark. There it is. And I'm going to go back a stitch, and I'm going to do my thread cut. Now, I just put into place, look at how perfect that corner is. It looks like I just literally turned the corner. Watch what's going to happen here. Here's my Y seam. Look at how tough this is, friends. All I'm going to do now is that I'm going to turn these 2 edges towards each other, like this. See that? See how they're matching up? Lovely, perfect. And then I'm just going to go ahead and sew it. And I did go ahead. Now, as we come in this, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with this, because you'll see it naturally does it anyway. So I've got my 1/4 inch. Now, the point, the center, let me get a little further up so you can see. My whole square here is almost folded in half, and you can see where those 2 points are coming together right in there. And I'm going to come right up to where those seams intersect, and I get right to that point, and I go back a stitch, and I cut it. Look at what we have just created. The most lovely, perfectly formed Y seam you could probably ever imagine. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my next pieces to this. Look at how pretty that is. Isn't that nice? Here, let me step back just a little bit for you to see. Look at how great that looks in there. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and put my other pieces on. You're going to actually, this pattern is going to become one of your best friends, because when you look at this and you see how neat this works together, you're going to look for opportunities to do this. Now, if you aren't as excited about this as clearly I am, don't worry about it. You absolutely could still do this whole block without doing a Y seam. And so there are some pieces that are on your instructions that show you how to do this. And so, let me see, I got that one starting in the wrong place. I dropped the needle. I didn't mean to drop the needle. So what I did just there was I removed that. And so I'm going to lower my foot. Back and forth, one stitch. You've heard me say before, I'm not a huge fan of a thread cutter. And I really don't use it for a lot of things. In this one, I don't have any other way to do it. I have to stop in between. There we go. Now we're going to do our next Y seam. So I'm going to turn this, bring those two outer points together. It also helps that I'm using this from the 12-inch cube. Now, that's not to say you can't get the same results if you did this on the 6-inch or the 4-inch even. You absolutely can. Just a little bit easier to show you for this first one. Plus the fact I really wanted a lot of impact from this fabric. The K-facet fabrics, I didn't want to cut them down a lot. So there's corner number 2. Voila, perfect. Now look at that fabric. It's really behaving well. It's moving away from that heavier linen. And now when I go to do this last piece that's in here, I'm going to fold her in half. Just find that center piece there. I'm going to line it up with the center marking that I put on that. And I still am going to turn it over to the other side, because it's so much easier for me to see that's those 1/4 inch away, especially on this one, because on this one I'm actually going to back it up a couple stitches. Actually, I'm only going to need to back it up 1 stitch. And then I'm going to come up to this next point. Back it up. Do some trimming. I'm going to clean up my block here. If I add a longer thread here in a couple of places. Now I've got my last 2 corners to deal with. So all I'm going to do is pull those 2 points together. And the rest of it just behaves so very, very well. I get it underneath my needle. There's corner number 3, and here is corner number 4. It seems like that center square really gets out of the way when you're working on this block for me. I hope you have that same experience. I've had several people who have done Y seams for this Mystery Monday that they've never done them before, and they've just been really excited by the results. So look at that. That whole thing is Y seamed in. Now let's look at the back of it and see what we're going to do with this. So it looks to me like those seams are all going to go one direction or the other, and they did that without me pressing them. I am going to go ahead and give them a little press in there because I do want them to stay into their places when I go to put this next triangles on around the outside edge. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and start putting these friends around the outside edge. And I want you to see how beautiful those line up. This was the better way to do it. I had actually thought about sewing these on before I put the trapezoids on, but I can tell you that just from this experience, I'm really glad I didn't show you that first. I'm glad I showed you this way first because it allowed me to really focus on that center and get that center down to square. The other thing I like about this next step that I'm seeing right away is the outer points of these half square triangles are matching up perfectly with the outer points on the trapezoid pieces. So when you look at that, see where they are? They're just perfectly lined up. Now when I go to do the pressing on this one, I am going to press this in this particular case right away when I turn it. This heavier fabric is pushing that K-facet fabric in, and I'm going to let it do its job. There's occasionally this happens where you'll have a fabric that kind of bosses it around. And I'm going to let this one do it. I typically do slow down a little bit when I'm hitting that point. I do not want to lose the point on that triangle. So there we go. We're going to do a little bit of pressing here. Now we're going to add these other pieces onto these sections, and look what happens here. That point, that corner right there fits perfectly in there, which means it's giving me that 1/4 inch allowance around my block. It's going to fit in there elegantly. There. Let's get our last one in. So just looking at my clock right now to see what my time is, we are at, this took us 23 minutes to sew this out, but that was sewing and instructing. So let's kind of extrapolate that out a little bit more. So that means that you can get at a pretty steady clip 3 blocks done in an hour, because you are going to get more confident and more excited about that. I doubt there was an hour of cutting in this. I probably spent an hour picking my fabrics and cutting. That was it. So I mean, this is going to make into a really classy quilt. So look at that block. Voila. Isn't she a beauty? Pretty exciting. Okay, let's go on to the next part. Now comes my favorite part. Let's recap. This one is the scrappy version. This is going to chew up a whole bunch of fabric out of your stash, and you're going to have a great time using it up. As you saw with mine, I used about 5 yards of scrappy fabric and put it into what's going to be a great quilt. It's going to be fairly large, not a lot of piecing. It takes me about 15 to 20 minutes to piece a block, and so it's going to be a fast one to get done, especially using my AccuQuilt. If you haven't got on board with AccuQuilt, give us a contact. We would love to help you with this. We're happy to help you with specialty rulers, but I'd like to get you going on using up more of your fabric. So this is the white background version of that same quilt. You can see you've got a little secondary pattern going on in there that's fascinating. And so there's some things that you can do to bring that out a little bit more. So as I kept playing with this, block as putting it together to teach you about trapezoid, I came across this version, and I call this a split trapezoid. So you can see the trapezoid is in there in those black fabrics, but you can see half square triangles are there in there, and there's a quarter square triangle in there. But look what happens with this block when you put it together without any sashings. It has really dynamic impact with a black background. So this is one definitely that I'm going to be playing with in the future. You'll probably see it in future Mystery Mondays as we explore this more and we look at more of those pieces in there. And then this is if I did a white version for the background on that. Same quilt, white is the background. Now never dismiss, you could do teal, yellow, gold, green. You can use all kinds of colors. You don't always have to use just black and white. As I was playing with trapezoids, I also came across these border options that I was playing with. One of them is the whole block as a border, but the other one is just a split. And look what happens when you get that border looking like a ribbon around the outside edge. Now let's go to that simpler block. This is if we just put the simpler block together as 9 of them and no sashings in between. And you can see you have a little bit of a secondary pattern going on in that. Now on this one, I took it and I expanded it and I made it 3 blocks by 4 blocks, so 12 blocks total. And you can see that little secondary pattern that's coming in there, but you're probably seeing those seams interrupted. You cannot put a Y seam in that one. You could, but it would be quite an adventure for you. So on this one in particular, I changed the colors. So instead of the trapezoids all being the same color, I took 2 of them and made them different. So I had 2 coordinated colors together, and it gives almost a ribbon effect to it. Now on this next one, I colored the centers of those blocks at all one color, so they're different than the background. And you can see it takes on even more pizzazz and impact, but same quilt. Now the next one, what I've done is I added a tiny little sashing. So instead of a 3.5 inch, I probably would do like a 2-inch one in there. And look at how sweet that looks. And what I've got is I still have those points pointing towards those squares. But if I would turn those sections around and if I would make that sashing a little bit bigger, this is the impact it gets. And so it's even more. So the sashing on this one is probably going to be about the same size as your squares and rectangles in there, like a 3.5 inch cut on this one. Now on this one, I turned it around, and instead of putting that, I put a trapezoid next to it, and I moved those outer triangles in those blocks around. So you have a totally different look, almost like a churn dash in there. In this one, I took that same previous one and then added different colors to all the blocks. Wow, huh? A lot of fun stuff going on. And this is a really simple block, simple unit to be building off of. You've seen it gives a lot of impact in very little space. Now in this one, what I did was I put the centers, the dark, but I also put those triangles towards the middle the same color. So it has a real different version to it. Now the next quilt that I'm going to show you is one that I found quite a bit. And every time I see it, I keep thinking trapezoids. I will tell you that sometimes trapezoids won't, you can reduce the seams, but this one is entirely made. Anytime I found it, it's all half square triangles. You could put trapezoids in there, but you're going to have to probably work with graph paper to do it. And in my opinion, I'm not sure it's worth it. But you know, I just want you to be aware that when you look at things like this and you see trapezoids, the answer could be yes, but it might take more to do than it would be worth, other than laying it down as half square triangles. So the more I played with it, the tougher it was get. Now comes my favorite part. I'm going to show you the quilts that inspired me and that really got me, keeping me look for trapezoids. This one is a really fascinating one. It definitely has trapezoids in it, but it's all built originally with half square triangles. So that's a key note. You don't typically see trapezoids, you see half square triangles. And then you squint and then you see the trapezoids. Now in this one in particular, they don't piece it as trapezoids, but when I practiced with it, it is trapezoids. So this is a pattern that we will have in the store. I'm not sure how they put it together, but I do know that when I played with it, I got it out of trapezoids, but I've also done these with half hexagons successfully, and I like them that way too. Now this next one is not necessarily trapezoids, but what I wanted you to see is that it's all made with triangles, but I wanted you to see that if you were to take like a scrappy fabric, just one scrappy fabric, you could cut trapezoids and make a quilt like this and have it look really, really fascinating. The next piece that you're looking at, this is the one, it's a version of the scrappy one, but basically these are all built out as just squares set on point. So this one's even simpler. It's just a center block and it's surrounded by parallelograms, or, vice versa. This next one is a close-up version of the first one that I showed. These are trapezoids, and they are sewn lengthwise. Now, on this one in particular, the designer had put it together so that it has pointy ends on it. You need to understand that you can finish those trapezoids out with half square triangles, and then you wouldn't have to have a pointed edge on it. This is the first one that I saw that inspired that simpler block that we did, the second block that we did of the section. And this was just a really sweet little 9-block quilt. Now this next one is the scrappy one. So it's the scrappy one that's but you can see there is a sashing that's put in there. And that sashing is the same width. So if we'd have done this with 2.5-inch squares, we'd have done a 2.5-inch sashing. If we'd have done it with 3.5-inch, we'd done 3.5-inch. Now this one is a pattern called beach bracelets. We do carry it in the store. However, it is not written with the technique of trapezoids. It is written a little bit differently, but it is trapezoids, and that's what inspired me to get this one. And we have a sample of it in the store that's a really beautiful sample. And then this one is, again, this is just pairing up. So the trapezoids that you see in there, that could be in there, are the background pieces, not the scrappy half square triangles. But you can see where that's in there, and you could actually put on that, in the centers, you could put the square on point in a Y seam, even with triangles. This is one of the versions of that quilt that I was showing you before. And it shows you how, I like this one version a little bit better because you can see better the differentiation. But never underestimate that the person who pieced this might have just pieced it entirely scrappy and just, randomly put them together. Now this one is not advertised as a trapezoid quilt, but the math on it that I had done, it's one called Molly's Quilt, I believe is the name of it. And it's one that we'll have in the store. We'll be investigating it to see how we can rewrite it. But it definitely is trapezoids paired up with chisels. Now this one's so simple, so stinking simple. It's just a parallelogram, excuse me, a trapezoid with a half square triangle, 2 half square triangles. So imagine this with a 16-inch cube. That's going to give a lot of impact. That alone is going to be, it's going to be a sizable quilt, great impact. This is another version of that one that I had talked to you about. You can see the trapezoids more clearly in this one. And again, I think the differentiation is the pieces in there by the different colors. Now this one is the very simple one that I had talked about that I'm making out of the K facet fabric. But I want you to notice around the outside edge of that how they have put in the rest of the triangles and put them as a border around the outside edge. And it adds a lot of great impact to it. Here again is the picture of the original one that I had seen that I showed you earlier. And you can see it's all done with half square triangles. I am sure this is a pattern that's out there. I wasn't able to locate it easily, but I found a lot of versions of it out and around. Now the next one is the trapezoid, the split trapezoid that I had shown you. And this has got one that's got a lot of legs and a lot of opportunity that I can see in it. And it's going to be a really easy one to put together. You can see that there are a lot of ways of looking at quilting now that you have some of the keys to it, like introducing trapezoids, introducing chisels, the kite die that we talked about recently. You start seeing different graphics that'll keep you from having to trim things down. This is our quilt in the store that we have. We did it out of batiks and white, and this is that one it's got the trapezoids in it, but then it has a tiny little sweet sashing in it. And then it has that border that's the interrupted rectangles. That's really fascinating. And here's just another simple one. This is simpler than our scrappy one. And basically it's just, you can see the trapezoid in there, and it just has the center pieces and then it has corners. And it's a very simple one to put together and a really sweet way to use up a lot of fabric. This next one was a block that I found, and it's pairing together quarter square triangles and treating the other half of it with the trapezoid and a half square triangle with it. And this is very typical to see. You see trapezoids that are out there, but when they design the pattern, they don't design it with a trapezoid in it. It's all done with half square triangles. And that's what's fascinating. This one would be great if you put it up together against other friends. And you'd see that some ways that you could stop having to redo all those pieces. This is the version of the scrappy one that we did at the beginning, and they've experimented with putting some other elements in there. I hope you have fun sewing the trapezoids. They've been a blast for me. In fact, I fully did not intend to start 2 new quilts, complete quilts, but I have. That's how inspiring this was for me. I hope we inspire you more and more every day. And I want to thank you for joining us for Mystery Monday. And I look forward to some really exciting things for our new Mystery Mondays coming up next year. And you'll hear about it in our last Mystery Monday class of 2025. Thanks so much for being you. And I look forward to inspiring you more.